With the success of the downsized Pontiac Grand Prix of 1969, Chevrolet would get its own version of this new so-called intermediate personal coupe. Prices started at over $3,100, or more than $200 above that of the Chevrolet Malibu it was based on. It was 206 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase, and 3,600 to 3,800 pounds, sharing its wheelbase with the four-door versions of the Chevelle. It used Corinthian helmet and shield badges, and the base engine was a 5.7-liter 350 cubic inch V8 with 250 to 300 gross horsepower. Options included a 6.6-liter 400 cubic inch small block and a 6.6-liter 402 cubic inch big block V8 with 265 or 330 gross horsepower. And in the Super Sport, a 7.4-liter 454 with 360 horsepower, or 450 horsepower in LS6 form, a high 13-second car with a top speed over 115 miles an hour. First-year sales were limited due to production issues, amounting to around 160,000. There were minor trim changes for 1971 and lower compression ratios for lower-octane unleaded fuels. The 350 was down to 245 to 270 gross horsepower, or 165 to 175 net. The 402 to 300 gross, or 260 net, and the 454 to 365 gross, or 285 net. And production was once again limited, this time due to a 2-month strike, putting the total under 130,000 for the year. 1972 saw the end of the Supersport package, which had included heavy-duty suspension and a wheel and tire upgrade. But the 454 carried on, although down to 270 net horsepower, and the 402 was down to 240 net horsepower. Power steering had become standard, and there was an all-vinyl interior option, with sales reaching 180,000. The cars would be restyled for 1973 with 5-mile-an-hour bumpers and heavily sculpted fenders. Wheelbase was unchanged, but length was up to 210 inches, and weight 3,800 to 4,000 pounds. The 350 and 454 carried over, with horsepower ranging from 145 to 245, and sales were 280,000 for the year. For 1974, the car received a minor facelift, or tail lift, as most of the changes were to the rear of the car, specifically the trunk lid, tail lights, and bumper. California models got an 160 horsepower 4-barrel version of the 350 as the base engine, while other states retained the 2-barrel 145 horsepower version. The 6.6-liter 400 returned in 150 to 180 horsepower tunes, while the 454 was down to 235 horsepower. The base model was dropped, and in spite of the oil embargo, sales were up to over 300,000. Changes were minor for 1975, but included more drops in power, with the 4-barrel 350 being down to 155 horsepower, the 4-barrel 400 175 horsepower, and the 454 was down to 215 horsepower. There was, however, a new custom package that added a cloth reclining split bench seat and carpeting on the door panels, but sales were down to 250,000, partly due to a higher starting price of above $4,200, up nearly 10% from the year before, and partly due to new competition from Chrysler. There was a facelift for 1976 that included stacked rectangular headlights, and there were more shifts to the power lineup, including the introduction of a 5-liter 305 with 140 horsepower. The 4-barrel 350 was back up to 165 horsepower, and the 454 was dropped, although the turbo hydromatic had become the standard transmission, and for 1977, the only transmission, and the 400 would be discontinued. The Monte Carlo would be downsized for 1978 to meet pending EPA regulations, 200 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase, and roughly 3,200 pounds. The base engine was a 3.8-liter 231 V6 with 105 horsepower, and the 145 horsepower 5-liter 305 was the top engine. The 3-speed manual returned as standard, but was only available with the 6. With the V8, it was a high 17-second car, capable of more than 115 miles an hour, in spite of only having an 80-mile-an-hour speedometer. And although prices were now starting at $4,800, sales leapt up to nearly $360,000. Engine options would shift again for 1979, with the 94 horsepower 3.3-liter 200 cubic inch straight 6 becoming the base engine outside of California, while V8 options expanded to include an 125 horsepower 4.4-liter 267 and a 4-barrel version of the 305, raising output to 160. The manual would be gone again for 1980, and a mild facelift added quad headlights. The base engine became a 3.8-liter 229 V6, raising output to 115 horsepower, again except in California, where the 231 Buick V6 remained, an engine that was offered outside of California in turbocharged form. Providing 170 horsepower, it moved the car to a low 17-second quarter mile and speeds near 125 miles an hour, but overall sales dropped below 150,000. Styling was freshened for 1981, giving it a much cleaner look overall, but little else changed. The turbo was dropped for 1982, and so were bucket seats, but a 5.7-liter 350 diesel was added. The Super Sport returned for 1983, getting a unique aero look, monochrome paint schemes, a wheel and tire upgrade, performance suspension, and a performance rear axle, while power came from an 175 horsepower version of the 305. Power was up by 5 on the Super Sport for 1984, and bucket seats returned to the options list, while the diesel was dropped. And Mexico got a limited number of Super Sports of their own that used the interior from the Pontiac Grand Prix, didn't get the rear wing or wheel and tire upgrade, but did get a 350 with a 4-speed. For 1985, the base engine became a fuel-injected 4.3-liter 262 V6, providing 130 horsepower. There were 4 different looking models for 1986, the base Sport Coupe, which looked just like it had since 1981, the LS with an updated front that did away with the sealed beam headlights for what was advertised as a European look, the standard Super Sport package, and the Super Sport Aero Coupe with a sloped rear window. Overall sales remained over 110,000. The base Sport Coupe was dropped for 1987, and the Aero Coupe for 1988, which would be the Monte Carlo's last year, being replaced by the Lumina. But with the Lumina restyle of 1995, two-door models returned to the Monte Carlo name, roughly the same size at 201 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase and 3,300 pounds. The base LS used an overhead valve 3.1-liter, 190 cubic inch V6 with 160 horsepower, while the sportier Z34 used a bigger 3.4-liter, 210 cubic inch dual overhead cam V6 for 210 horsepower, for a low 16-second quarter mile and speeds over 140 miles an hour. And there were 400 of the Brickyard 400 Pace Car editions produced, with special graphics and trim. More than 100,000 Monte Carlos sold for the year, but soon sales would drop below 70,000. In 1998, the Z34 switched to the Buick overhead valve 3.8-liter Buick V6, and horsepower dropped to 200, but torque was up 10 to 225, having little impact on the car's performance. In 2000, the Monte Carlo became a coupe version of the new Impala, getting all new styling that was inspired by NASCAR. And the Z34 was replaced by a revived Super Sport. Length was down to 198, and wheelbase was up to 111. Base engine became a 3.4-liter V6 with 180 horsepower, and there was a special Pace Car edition in red and silver, which would be in black and silver for 2001, yellow and silver for 2002, and blue and silver for 2003. 2002 would see the introduction of both the Super Sport Intimidator and the NASCAR Driver Signature Edition dress-up packages. The Intimidator was all black with special trim and wheels, and the Dale Earnhardt Edition was black and silver with red pinstripes. Then there would be a Jeff Gordon Edition for 2003, sharing its blue and silver with the Intimidator and adding ghost flames. The Intimidator would return to all black for 2004, while the Dale Jr. Edition was red with black stripes, and the Tony Stewart Edition of 2005 was black with a white and orange stripe along the rocker. The same year, a supercharger became available on the Super Sport, increasing output to 240 horsepower. It would get a facelift for 2006, and the engine lineup would change. Base engine was a 3.5-liter V6 with 211 horsepower. Optional on the LT, or standard on the new LTZ, was a 242 horsepower 3.9-liter V6. and the Super Sport moved to a 5.3-liter, 325 cubic inch LS4 V8 for 303 horsepower, making it a mid-14-second car with a top speed of 150. But sales were down to around 35,000 by this point. 2007 would be its final year, and with the coupe market currently struggling for survival, it is unlikely the Monte Carlo will be making a comeback. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.